Hello, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today we're going to be going on a journey. You might even say we'll be going on an odyssey of sorts, because as I described in the summary of today's live stream, Christopher Nolan's much anticipated interpretation of the Odyssey was released this week in theaters. And even if you haven't seen it, this will not be a review or a frame by frame critique of Nolan's interpretation. That is not the intention or purpose of today's live stream. Instead, we're going to be using Nolan's interpretation as a springboard to journey back into Homer's epic poem and truly delve deep into its symbolic and allegorical meaning. In other words, to extract its universal truths, the substance, the true substance of Homer's epic, and why it is that it has survived more than 3,000 years, because for hundreds of years before it was actually recorded, it was an oral tradition passed down generation to generation. And it transcends anything that modern audiences or modern intellectuals give it credit for. And most every reading, analysis, interpretation that I have seen of Homer has been like watching someone skipping stones across a pond. Just skipping across the surface, but none dive below the surface to be able to fish out from the depths the true core, the true essence and spirit of this Odyssey. And the hero at the center of that Odyssey, whose name is synonymous with great voyages and adventures and heroic journeys, if you will. I see that we have Azazel in the chat. Hello, my brother. It's nice to see you. It's nice to see you after all this time. I think you picked a good one to return. Now, some of you may have noticed behind me, I have chosen as background an image of the Divine Mother. And I've done that specifically and purposefully, as I always do when selecting backgrounds for this live stream, so as to always make it available to you as a reminder who and what is at work in the Odyssey. This is key. We know that it is about Odysseus, but of all the gods who play a role, and of all the ancillary characters that Odysseus meets, today I'm going to reveal to you their true identity, or rather the true force at play, at work, guiding Odysseus and testing him on the Odyssey. And this particular image of the Divine Mother is one of my personal favorites. So hopefully it will serve me as well and help guide me through the process of today's discussion. So very briefly, for those who are not familiar with the Odyssey, who perhaps haven't seen Nolan's film or haven't seen the 1997 television adaptation or any of the other adaptations of Homer's Odyssey, or even "O Brother, Where Art Thou?" or or Ulysses, because Ulysses is the Roman name for Odysseus. But this myth has obviously been told and retold and adapted and readapted and translated time and time and time again throughout the ages, and very often in the modern age. But in broad strokes, the Odyssey tells the story of Odysseus's role in the fall of Troy and the events that befall him as he and his men endeavor to return home to Ithaca. Now, a little bit of backstory on Troy is necessary, for it is that war between Agamemnon and Menelaus on one side and the city-state of Troy on the other. It's perhaps also important to offer a little backstory on history. The Greeks have not yet congealed into that which we understand to be the Greeks and ancient Greek civilization. This is several hundred years prior to the unification of Greece. So Greece or Greeks exist as multiple city-states that, while Agamemnon is attempting to, or has united multiple of these city-states, each city-state still maintains its own ruling authority, its own king, and Odysseus is the king of Ithaca. Penelope is his wife. I better get a list of names up on the screen because I'm going to forget them. His son, Telekinesis, I believe that's where the word telekinesis comes from, I believe, is his only son, and he's born on the day that Odysseus leaves to go make war with Agamemnon and Menelaus against Troy. So his son is literally a newborn on the day. So Odysseus is there for the birth of his son, but then he has to go and fight the Trojan War. Now, the Trojan War, as I'm sure most of us know, is precipitated when Paris, the young prince of Troy, elopes with Helen, who is betrothed to Menelaus. Paris and an envoy from Troy are guests in Menelaus's house. I believe his city-state, his empire, is known as the Minoans, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But Helen is said to be the most beautiful woman in the world. And it is about her that we get the quote from Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe, Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships? And although that line never appears in Homer, it's still, the conceit is that Helen is the most beautiful woman in the world. And the significance of this is that Helen, when we talk about beauty, it's not just physical beauty. So I'm going to start getting right into the meat and potatoes of this, because there's not going to be time for me to go back and like give you a summary and then go back and start correcting everything. In fact, the Greeks, the whole Hellenistic period of the Greeks is named after Helen. And it is, to one degree or another, it's interpreted in some interpretations of Homer, Helen is kidnapped by Paris. In others, she goes willingly, she goes freely because she falls in love with the young prince of Troy, whereas Menelaus is an old man, a middle-aged man. Regardless, this gives Agamemnon an excuse to go to war with Troy, because Zeus's law, which is do unto others as others would do unto you, it is the law of hospitality, especially when you have guests in your house, in your company. You must treat them with utmost respect. But also too, if you are a guest in someone's house, you must respect them and treat them with the utmost of respect and treat their hospitality and not take advantage of it. So it's really Troy that violates Zeus's law when Paris elopes, right? Like steals away Helen from her fiance, from her essentially husband, betrothed. This act is what gives Agamemnon, who's very ambitious, to conquer and unite all of the Greek states into his empire. It gives him an excuse to go to war and start the Trojan War. And that is how he comes to Ithaca and calls upon Odysseus to raise an army from his own island, his own city-state, and join him and Menelaus in their campaign against Troy to, quote, rescue Helen. So what follows, as I'm sure everybody is familiar with, is the 10 years of war, and Troy is said to have walls that are impenetrable and a gate that cannot be breached. But that doesn't stop the Greeks from going and precipitating this war for some 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, everyone is quite demoralized, demotivated, and their numbers are down and their resources are down and everything else. But Odysseus is inspired by his cleverness he creates this ruse. He dreams up of this ruse. And that ruse is the legendary Trojan horse. The Greek ships will appear to have sailed away, and they will leave behind, built from the pieces of several of their ships, a gigantic wooden horse. And it will be left there as an offering to Poseidon, the god of the ocean, the god of the seas, to give them favorable winds on their voyage home. Now, there's some details around this that, I don't want to necessarily get into with, how Christopher Nolan interpreted and what happened. And again, because this is not a review of his film, I just felt that if it's an opportunity for me to explain what is really happening, then if you do watch the film or have watched the film, you will see the differences for yourself, and you will see the cultural and mythological what's the right word? Is there such a thing as mythocide? Because that's what it is. It's a murdering of the myth. It's a secularization. It's a complete reduction and modernization, and again, contemporary political interpretation of what is high mythology. So back to the beach. This enormous wooden horse is left on the beach, and one of Odysseus's soldiers, in Nolan's interpretation, his name is Sinon, stays behind to inform the Trojans that this is an offering to the gods, to Poseidon. And the Trojans take it also as a gift left behind by the Greeks as a symbol of their victory and of the Greeks' defeat. So they will take it into the city and take it to the temple, because if it's an offering to Poseidon, then they'll take it to the temple, and they will burn it in effigy as that offering, as that sacrifice to the gods. And so they do so. They take it into the city. Now, we all know the story, or at least you should know the story. After all the Trojans have gone to sleep, out from the belly of the beast, right, from the innards of the horse, very quietly and stealthily, a handful of Greeks, including Odysseus, emerge. They were stowed away inside of the Trojan horse. And they go to the gate, and they open the gate. And then the whole of the Greek army, which only sailed around to the other side of the island, are waiting for the gates to open, and they flood into Troy while everybody is sleeping, and they essentially sack the city. And this is where the expression Trojan horse comes from, and why there are computer viruses known as Trojans, which again appear on your computer like an email or a message or a graphic or a program of some kind, and it's very enticing. These Trojans appear to be some kind of program or something of value, so that you will click on them and open them. And when you do that, the malware that is hidden inside of those Trojans now can go and take access and gain access to your system. That's how, quote, Trojans work in computer viruses. So that functionality and that word itself, this is the myth that it comes from. But all of this is backstory to the Odyssey. This part of the story doesn't take place in the Odyssey. It is retold as the backstory of the Odyssey, because it actually takes place in the Iliad, which is another epic poem by Homer. As Azil says, they should have done it like Monty Python, just catapult the Trojan horse back at them. You know, the jokes and memes about that, about Nolan's Odyssey, so many people are making the comparison to Monty Python for all the scenes where Matt Damon is and his men are basically, he's basically yelling, run away, and they're all just, you know what I mean? So there's lots and lots of, and also the grunginess, the dark and grunginess, the grittiness of the film. There's lots and lots of people making the comparison to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which incidentally is a far superior film. So After sacking the city, Odysseus decides he's going to take his men and his ships, and he's going to return to Ithaca. Now, it's been 10 years, mind you. I suppose it's important at this point to mention that Odysseus's wife, Penelope, has been waiting for him all this time. However, since she is the queen of Ithaca, other suitors have invaded, is not the right word, but they have occupied the palace, the house of Odysseus, the house of Penelope, basically the royal residence, if you will, the equivalent of the castle or whatever, the royal residence. And they have been essentially invited themselves as suitors to offer themselves to become Penelope's husband and not necessarily assume the throne, but at least assume the throne at least until Telechonidas comes of age, which is Odysseus' son, or whichever suitor Penelope chooses, unless they have a son. And then the suitor's son would become king of Ithaca. But Penelope has been refusing them. Penelope believes in her heart of hearts that Odysseus is alive and that she will wait for her husband. So this is, as Homer's Odyssey unfolds, as the story unfolds, there's this twin story. There's an A story and a B story, but it's a story of twins that is taking place. One is out there in the world, and one is at home in the palace. And the one that is out there in the world is Odysseus's story, right? The husband, the king. And what's happening in the home, in the royal palaces back in Ithaca, is Penelope's story, the feminine. So right away, we have the two pillars of the tree of life. Right away, we have the essential masculine and feminine. And remember, these are husband and wife, so they are one. And the kingdom of Ithaca is theirs. And united, they produce an heir to that empire, which is Telechonidas, played by Tom Holland in Nolan's film. But he's not yet of age, right? He is still a king in potentiality only. In order for him to become king, the journey must unfold. Odysseus must return home and be reunited with Penelope. But all of these suitors, these pretenders to the throne, claim that Odysseus is dead, and they want to unite with Penelope. They want to assume the throne. They want to be the top dog. They are the, if you will, the masculine aspects of the kingdom that are a multiplicity, because there are many, many, many suitors seeking Penelope's hand. And they are entrenched. They have encroached upon her house. They've, again, invaded is a strong word, but occupied. They have occupied her house, and they are taking advantage of her hospitality. She is fulfilling Zeus's law, but they are taking advantage of that hospitality, and if given the opportunity, they are going to take advantage of her and take advantage of what she represents and what she brings to the table, which is the throne of Ithaca. The rule of the kingdom, in other words. This is very important. Now, I think again, I might just come right out and say this, right? This is a symbol. This is not to be taken literally. Sure, literally on the surface, this is a drama between a king and a queen and suitors and a throne and a kingdom and a son and birthrights and all that nonsense. It's a great soap opera that the Greeks and for generations the Western world has been obsessed with it. But why? What's so enduring? There are countless other stories like this. It's the same thing that made the Game of Thrones so compelling. It wasn't just the sex and the violence and the fantasy and the dragons and the acting and all that. That's secondary. It was that all of these different houses were vying and scheming and backstabbing one another to do what? To be able to claim the Iron Throne. Now, what's special about the Iron Throne in Game of Thrones? It is made up of thousands of rusty swords and weapons from all those who have sat on it in the past. In other words, there is a multiplicity represented, embodied in the throne, in the seat of power. And all the houses of Game of Thrones covet that throne, just like the great multiplicity who have sat on that throne in the past coveted the throne. And presumably, many of the swords, weapons, and daggers and knives that make up the throne, the Iron Throne, many of those knives were used to backstab the previous ruler, the previous king, in order for that the next person could assume power. Because certainly the way the Game of Thrones is written, that's sort of implied. It is that aspect that made Game of Thrones so compelling. It is that aspect that makes the B story in Homer so compelling, that Penelope is fighting off these suitors and fighting off their advances. They are trying to woo her. They are trying to tempt her. They're trying to convince her that Odysseus is dead, that nobody's heard from him. The last anybody heard from him is that he sacked Troy, but that was years and years ago. What this represents are the ego's desire to rule, and that at home, our house, our temple, our vessel, our kingdom is constantly occupied by many suitors that are all pretenders to the throne. And they seek to couple with our queen, which is, in us, the energetic embodiment of our individual divine mother, our sexual energy. That's what they want. Those egos, they want our energy and they want to rule us. That's called sin. Those are our defects and vices: pride, greed, gluttony, lust, fear, anger, and all the rest of them. But in order to sit upon the throne, they must woo that feminine side. That is the aspect of us which can be tempted in the same way that Eve is tempted in the Garden of Eden. Because it is the feminine aspect of this humanity we have the two energetic channels within us, Ida and Pingala. It is Ida, the feminine aspect, our inner Eve, which is fallen. Because that is within us. The feminine is what is able to receive. And so it is the feminine aspect which is targeted and which is hypnotized, which is wooed, which is set upon. I don't want to use the R word, right? Which is graped for what she can provide. And it is in us the sexual force, that creative force. And with that force, with that energy, if a suitor lays with the queen, then he assumes the throne. He assumes the power that is hers as queen. He becomes her consort. And what they beget, if they have a child, that child inherits the throne, not the child of Odysseus, who is the true ruler of Ithaca. Right? Because the father is in exile. The father is in absentia, right? He's absent. He's off on his heroic journey. This is, that B story is what happens within us when our Father, who art in heaven, is in absentia, is absent from our consciousness, is absent from our house. Our house is not a house of the Father. All we are left with is our animal nature, our mortal self, which is feminine, Mother Nature, our mechanical nature. We're left with that mechanical self and the energy of our Divine Mother, which is Divine Mother Devi Kundalini Shakti. That's all we're left with. And if that's all we're left with, that's all we have, and we don't have our innermost being, our Father who art in heaven, sitting upon the throne of our own Ithaca, then our Divine Mother and that sexual force has to somehow hold down the fort and hold off the suitors that all covet and crave that throne, to sit upon the throne, to rule over us. And they do so by lusting after our queen, our individual Divine Mother. That's Penelope in Homer. Now, it should be mentioned that of all the gods that play out in Homer's Odyssey, Athena is the one who has a kind of special, there's a special place. Odysseus has a kind of special place in her heart. She admires Odysseus's courage, his devotion to his family, his devotion to his people, but also his cleverness. Odysseus is cunning, and he is an excellent hunter and a warrior, and he's wise, and he's all these things. He's a great man. And so Athena, the goddess Athena, admires him for that and believes that he is a worthy hero. He's a worthy champion. So she will appear to him throughout Homer's poem. And in fact, she blesses him, and she offers him guidance and advice, and he takes her as, yeah. So let me see if I can share this screenshot. This is from the 1997 television adaptation.
Is there any way to speak to your protector?
This is on he's on his.
I think the wine swells your head, my Odysseus.
This is when he's on the journey to the Trojan War. She will appear to him at times like this, and he says something. He's Odysseus is quite his attitude towards the gods is quite flippant at this point. He's quite arrogant. He is not exactly envious is not the right word, or cynical is not even the right word. He believes in man. He believes in himself, and he doesn't like how the gods seem to play dice with the world and play games with men, and the men are just pawns in the gods entertaining themselves. So the gods have these dramas between themselves, and then man ends up being their pawns or whatever. So he's not. But when Athena shows up, so this scene, why this particular adaptation is so good, not for production value or whatever, right? It's not going to compare with something made today with all sorts of fancy, because there's no fancy computer graphics or anything like that. But I'm trying to, you know what? I'm going to put it on mute, and then I'll take the words off. I'm just going to play it in the background again, because I want to, if you noticed, the sails on Odysseus's boat, all at how utterly asleep people are, that perhaps Lupita Nyong'o didn't even read Homer, certainly never watched this 1997 adaptation, is that women are everywhere in this poem. And we're going to get deeper and deeper into it. They hold all the power over Odysseus and his journey. Why is that? Because they are all expressions of Athena. They are all working. They are all divine feminine expressions of the divine feminine, of the divine mother of Athena, who sets Odysseus on this journey to sack Troy. Why? Because Troy must pay the price for stealing Helen, the most beautiful woman of the ancient world. Helen is the living embodiment, the personification of Athena in mortal form. It's a crime not only against Zeus, it was a crime against Athena. It was a crime against the Divine Mother. It was essentially making the physical embodiment, the mortal incarnation of the Divine Mother, into a whore. Because remember, the Divine Mother, just like Virgin Mary, has two sides, two forms, the duplicity of Divine Mother Nature and mechanical nature. Right? The sexual force can flow up and at him or down and out. And we have in ancient Hinduism also, we have, Divine Mother Shakti, but we also have Kali, the destroyer of worlds. So, and where we get the expression, hell hath no fury, as woman scorned. It is Athena that has been scorned. Yes, Zeus's law was violated, but no, it was the fact that it was Helen. Imagine if, and we're talking about the ancient proto-Greeks now, right? There's no Greece yet. There's no Greeks as we understand them. This is such an ancient story, but it's a myth, it's a fairy tale, it's a morality play, and it is an embodiment of divine ethics. And to them, Athena is essentially the feminine aspect of God. She's the feminine aspect of Zeus. And Helen, the most beautiful woman in the ancient world, beauty is truth and truth beauty. Imagine if Jesus would have come down to earth as a woman. Just imagine that. Imagine if that, or to not confuse anybody or get anybody's back up. Imagine if Mary, the Virgin Mother of Jesus, imagine if part of the Bible story had some king from a foreign land come to Jerusalem or come to Bethlehem and snatch Mary away from Joseph and take her to be his concubine. This is what the taking of Helen represents in Homer. She is the most perfect embodiment of the divine feminine and the beauty and the truth of Athena on earth. So Athena calls upon her champion, the one who she admires, the one who she knows has the wit and the will, the bravery, the cunning, and the pride, the hubris to do this thing, to sack Troy and to win back Helen for Menelaus. But in this specific scene, she describes how well she knows Odysseus and Odysseus's men. And I love the fact that in this adaptation, they have her face on his sails because she's always watching them. She's always watching Odysseus. All of Odysseus's soldiers, by the way, are aspects of his personality. They are all egos within Odysseus. Okay? We have to dispense with any kind of realistic, naturalistic interpretations of mythology. All mythology personifies that which is metaphysical and psychological and spiritual. All these different elements that Odysseus describes to Athena, and what Athena is pointing out, oh, there's this guy, he's so forth, and then Odysseus with pride is showing his admiration for his men. These are his men. They are who are going to help him win this battle because he's the best blacksmith and he's the best this and the best that, and that's why he has no fear and da da da. And so he is showing his hubris. He's revealing to us how proud he is of his men, but his men are aspects of him. In mythology, that's how it works. The personification of different aspects of one soul, one personality, one character. And that will be just like the suitors in the palace are all egos trying to steal away Penelope, which I explained already, right? So the fact that Odysseus is on a journey and Penelope is back home, Odysseus and Penelope are one, but remember, Odysseus is the father and he is absent. And so the story of home is what happens when we are disconnected from our innermost being. And then those egos try to take over. And why is that happening? Why is the father absent? Well, he's absent because he's going on this quest, sent on this quest by Athena to be tested, to win back Helena, and to undo the crimes against Zeus, the All-Father. But he's driven in part by pride, and it is that pride that sends him on that journey. It's very subtle, and it's very, very, very layered. It's not some simplistic, superficial adventure tale. This is a deep, deep psycho-spiritual exploration of the soul, the Odyssey. And all of this depth of meaning that has universal implications in all of our lives. This is the pith, this is the nucleus, and the fire and the energy and the depth of purpose behind the words and behind the superficial telling of the adventure tale on the surface. It is this deeper exploration. It is this deeper level of the Odyssey, which has made this story endure for thousands of years. And what makes this story so compelling, generation after generation after generation. Not the surface. As Azil says, it took me a great while to comprehend that the eternal feminine is the greatest power in this universe, like Samael stated. Yes, and this without question, this is Homer would have known this implicitly. And that's why Lupita Nyong'o's comments about, oh, I would have told Homer, hey, why did you spend so little time with the women? Is so ignorant. I mean, it's just ignorant. She obviously didn't read it or didn't watch this or has zero appreciation for the position of power and authority that the divine feminine has in this tale. It's Athena who is calling the shots. It is Athena who is testing Odysseus. Anyway, let's get on with it. So we go through the entire Trojan War, which I described. I guess this is back home. There we go. So, you know, we get to the Trojan horse part, and I explained all this. They take the Trojan horse in, they come out of the Trojan horse, they sack. There's a Troy burning as well, it's kind of hard to it skips many frames as I advance here, but there's a good shot of Troy burning with the Trojan horse in the background, or at least there would be if I could get more a better advance it in fewer frames. So now at this point, Odysseus goes to the shore and he calls out to Poseidon, and he said, look what I've done. I've done this. I'm Odysseus, right? And Poseidon tells him to be humble and to ask for favorable winds or whatever to take him home. And Odysseus is Odysseus is a tragic hero, and his tragic flaw is hubris, pride. So he basically tells Poseidon to, you know, whatever, you know, go to hell or whatever. I'm Odysseus. I don't need you to get home. I will follow the path that I know, and we'll go this way. We'll take the shortest route, because Poseidon tells him to take the longer route, the longer, perhaps more difficult route. And he says, no, I'm taking the direct route. I'm going the shortest way, the easiest way to get back home. And in the course of doing that, Odysseus and his men, oh, there's a nice shot of the ship with the sails. Really wish Yeah, there's a nice shot of the ship with Athena on the sails. What we want to get to is the famous scene that precipitates the actual journey, the actual Odyssey itself. And this is a nice shot from this adaptation. Everybody's hungry. All of Odysseus's men are hungry. They've been on the boat, on the ship for months, trying to navigate home. But they finally find an island, and they go to this island, and on this island they're searching for food, and they find some provisions and whatnot. They're following, and this, without saying anything, this is a beautiful shot that foreshadows the danger, the looming danger on this particular island. Well, they find this cave, and in this cave, they find a whole lot of cheese. Someone's been making cheese, and of course, cheese is very nourishing, and so they assume the hospitality of the person who is absent from the cave. There's the occupant, the owner of the cave, is not there, but all of these sheep stomachs and sheep bladders are full of fermented cheese, and so they all start eating cheese, and they make a fire, and they're resting, and they're revitalizing themselves, and they're taking advantage of the hospitality of the owner of this cave, who's not actually there yet. Well, then of course, they roll the stone away, and the sheep come in. The shepherd, in other words, returns, and this is the famous scene with the Cyclops. And the Cyclops' name is Polyphemus. Polyphemus, yeah. Polyphemus or Polyphemus. Now, in Nolan's version, there's no conversation between Odysseus and the Cyclops. And so, but in Homer's version, there is a conversation that takes place between Odysseus and the Cyclops. And the Cyclops introduces himself as Polyphemus, and Odysseus tells him, "I am nobody. I am nobody." In other words, for a moment, Odysseus fights against his urge, his hubris, and his pride for the sake of his men, and but out of cleverness, because he is cunning, he tells the Cyclops, "Oh, I'm nobody." So what happens is the Cyclops eats a couple of Odysseus's men, and all of his men are terrified and horrified, and chaos breaks out, and so Odysseus and his men have to escape, but they can't. They're trapped because the Cyclops has rolled the big heavy stone over the entrance of the cave, and so they can't escape unless he moves that. But so he says, "Well, let's just sleep here. Let's just wait until the morning, because in the morning he's going to move the stone away and let the sheep out. And when he does that, then we'll be able to escape." And he does so, they do so, but in order to facilitate their escape, so that Polyphemus cannot catch them on their or prevent their escape, or even see that they're escaping, Odysseus blinds Polyphemus with a spear, because of course the Cyclops has one eye, right? And so he blinds Polyphemus, and because Polyphemus now is blinded, they can escape. And now this is an island of giants. This is an island of enormous giants. And Polyphemus runs out and shouts, "Nobody blinded me! Nobody blinded me! Nobody attacked me! Nobody is getting away!" Right? And because he's shouting, "Nobody blinded me! Nobody hurt me! Nobody is running away!" none of the other giants come to his aid. Well, because nobody blinded him. So this is the cleverness and the cunningness of Odysseus. But once he gets back to his ship, him and his men, he turns and he shouts back to Polyphemus, the Cyclops. He says, "When people ask you who did this to you, who blinded you, who bested you, tell them it was I, Odysseus. Tell them Odysseus did this." In other words, we discover that the nobody line was out of cunning, it was cleverness, it was feigned humility. And at the end, when he has bested his opponent, the Cyclops, Odysseus cannot help himself. He cannot help himself. He turns back and he calls out to the Cyclops.
I am your father, Poseidon! It is he who made me blind you! You hear? Poseidon! I am alive! Odysseus is alive! And you cannot stop me!
Okay, now the significance of that part of why he was shouting Poseidon, Poseidon, because Polyphemus, the Cyclops, is the son of Poseidon. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack here. A lot to unpack. In Nolan's version, none of this is in there. The nobody and Odysseus yelling back. There's no conversation between him and Polyphemus. In other words, this entire chapter is completely, it's in there. There is a Cyclops. Ooh, and there's action and suspense and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff, right? But it completely misses the point, and here's why. Polyphemus comes from the Greek poly and phemos. Now, poly means many or much or great, right? Large amount. And phemos means is essentially notoriety or fame. What's the other? Yeah, so poly and pheme, right? So meaning, so it also means voice. Pheme means voice or repute, like reputation, rumors or fame. So rumors, hearsay, gossip, okay? But poly means much and many. So Polyphemus means many voices or much reputation, much fame. He is the personification of the glory that Athena promised him. And Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon. Now, Poseidon is the god of the oceans. And Athena, right, is the divine mother. So she's the divine mother of the sexual waters. So Poseidon has that aspect to it, but Polyphemus being his son is essentially a Nephilim, right? He is the result of a union between a human and a god, Poseidon, the god of the waters. So it is Polyphemus is a Nephilim, he's a giant who is the product of the union between a human and the divine waters. And his eye is single. And the significance of that is reflected, of course, in the third eye, but also in Matthew chapter 6, verse 22. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Polyphemus, the Cyclops, who's always depicted as a monster, and Nolan depicts him as a deformed mutant. He's a monster, he's a terror, right? Why does he eat? Why does he eat Odysseus's men? Because it is a symbol of transmutation. Odysseus's men represent Odysseus's egos, aspects of his personality that he is so prideful of. They're aspects of his mortal human self. But the rest of the time, Polyphemus, the Cyclops, he eats cheese. What is cheese? Cheese is the alchemical transformation of milk, sheep's milk, into a far more nourishing source of food. Because sheep's cheese, it's fermented sheep's cheese, is so much more nutritious than just sheep's milk, but it's an alchemical transmutation. Polyphemus is half human, as all Nephilim are. Half human, half god. And Polyphemus is the union between man and Poseidon, the god of the ocean. And Poseidon beseeches Odysseus to obey him, to serve him, and to obey him, to humble himself before him. But Odysseus' pride prevents him from doing that. And so Poseidon tests him and his men on the ocean and almost kills them before they get to this island. But once they get to this island, and this whole drama with the Cyclops unfolds, Odysseus blinds the Cyclops and yells back, "Tell Poseidon that Odysseus did this." So again, in defiance of the gods, in defiance of the Father and the divine waters who sired Polyphemus out of the many voices in Odysseus's head and out of the much fame that he desires, is the potential through transmutation to become a Nephilim, to become a half man, half god, to make your eye single and to make your whole body a body of light, a resplendent being. Polyphemus, the intellectuals, the literary scholars, the people adapting it for film, cinema, they make him out to be a monster. This adaptation is much better because he's not as horrific as certainly he is in the Nolan interpretation. But everybody makes the Cyclops out to be a monster, when the Cyclops represents Odysseus's potential if only he submit to the will of the gods. This is his potential, to become a Nephilim, to become a giant among men. But Odysseus is blinded by his pride. Odysseus's pride, his hubris, blinds him. That is the symbol of the Cyclops being blinded by Odysseus. This is how you know that the Cyclops and Odysseus are the same person. The Cyclops represents what Odysseus could be, a giant among men, united, the offspring of the divine waters of Poseidon and a mortal man. To know the divine waters, to know one's inner divine waters intimately, and to transmute the sheep milk, to have the men, the aspects of the personality and the egos devoured by this giant that is our potential, that we could become, that we could be, if we allow the divine waters within us to transmute us alchemically and give birth to this Nephilim, this giant among men. And Odysseus, out of his pride, out of his ego, he is blinded to all of this. Just as all of the intellectuals are blinded to it, just as all of the filmmakers are blinded to it, they don't understand. They are not conscious of the actual meaning of this scene and the power of this scene, psychologically and esoterically, spiritually. So when Odysseus blinds the Cyclops, he is himself blinded by his pride. And we know this because he shouts back from the boat, "It was I, Odysseus, that did this. I bested you. Tell Poseidon, I bested you." Essentially, he's defying the gods, and he's telling Poseidon, "Look, I blinded your son, your child, and I can do this on my own. I don't need you." Out of the many voices in our head, and out of the great fame, the desire and reputation of our mortal self, right? We have the power to transmute all of that ego, that pride, and make our eye single and make our bodies resplendent with light and become sired by the divine waters of our Father in heaven. And then we can become giants among men. But our pride, our ego, and our identification, attachment to our mortal self and our cleverness, just like Odysseus, prevents us from doing that. So we sail on. And the next island that Odysseus and his men arrive upon is the island of Circe's, the witch. But actually, before we get there, I think there's a good scene here with I think it's waterfall. Yeah, he tries to fill his bladder, and then Poseidon. Poseidon prevents him from drinking from the waterfall.
Are you surprised? Admit it. I can see you're surprised.
Who are you?
I am Attlas, god of wind.
Oh.
This is my island, where soft breezes and raging tempests all begin.
Well, I'm honored, but why did you not allow me to drink?
Because I know you, Odysseus, lord of Ithaca. Do not be afraid. Step through the water. I have something for you. Come ahead. Do not be afraid. Come here.
You know me?
Everyone knows Odysseus, the great hero who built the Trojan horse. But Few Greeks know that you're the only one who can't go home.
Poseidon still believes he can stop me.
Poseidon this, Poseidon that. Poseidon's a bully. He's my cousin. He's arrogant. He's selfish. He forgets that the sea is nothing without the wind. And who's the god of the wind?
You guys got to tell me when I forget to put it on the
Guess who's
screen.
the god of the wind?
Watching it. Anyway, it's not that important, actually. It's not that. It wasn't Poseidon. It's another one of the gods. Anyway, so let's just continue here. The next island they get to is the island of Circe's the witch. And now Christopher Nolan does a very good job of this part. The men are starving again, and so Circe invites them to eat of her stew, and they start eating her stew, and in the process they transform into pigs. So Circe transforms all of Odysseus's men into pigs, and when Odysseus arrives, she seduces him, and for the sake of his men, he has to go into her bed and make love to her, and then on that basis she releases his men from the spell. In Nolan's Odyssey, none of that lovemaking is there, of course, because it's a modern, feminist interpretation, so we can't have that. But the actual way in which he did the transformation of the pigs was excellent. But apart from that, Odysseus just sits down and has a conversation with her and convinces her to change them back to men, which is stupid, because it denies the mythology of the scene, of this particular aspect of the story. This, by the way, is the palace of Circe. This is what Christopher Nolan gets very, very wrong, because he just has this witch living in a hut, and it completely denies the magical power, so that Circe, again, is a manifestation of the divine feminine, of the divine mother. Look at her palace. Look at where she lives. And again, this notion that we must unite with the divine, and that his men who are behaving like animals, his egos, those aspects of his mortal self, behaving like animals, in order to transform them back into human beings, we must appeal to our divine feminine. We must serve our divine feminine. We must serve our divine mother in the way that Athena at the outset on the ship told Odysseus that I am sending you on this journey. I want you to defeat the Trojans for me. And now that he defied Poseidon, defied the god of the oceans, now Athena is going to test him. And and every test that he goes through, again, he's always forced to have to give up aspects of himself, or give up his pride, give up his hubris, for the sake of his men, for the sake of returning home to his wife. It's all so the rest of the Odyssey, the rest of the journey, is him being tested in these ways. There's the scene with the lotus eaters, where his men eat the lotus flowers, and they forget who they are. They forget the journey. But Odysseus is the one who doesn't eat them. Let's see. Then there's, we're getting into This is actually a very long sequence in this adaptation. We return to... Then she tells him he has to descend into Hades to walk in fire. Let's see. In order to know what to do next. In order to save his men. And he must make an offering. Yeah, so he offers to gain access to that knowledge. By the way, the executive producer of this particular adaptation back in 1997 was Francis Ford Coppola, was one of the executive producers. So this is part 2. Oh, wait a minute. No, let's go back. Give me a moment to find the version that I want here. It's part 1 of 2. Where's 2 of 2? So clearly you can watch this on your own time, both parts, for free on YouTube. So this is part 2 now. This is where we left off. This was going into hell. And it's not.
And there you will reach the straight.
This is great because this is what's that actor's name? Oh, why am I so bad with names? Why can't I remember a single name? Christopher Lee. Sir Christopher Lee plays the blind prophet in hell. So it's actually a good scene. So you have this scene of the descent into hell, in order to gain wisdom. But there's another aspect of the prophecy that doesn't get revealed here in this version, which is that all of his men are doomed because they're going to defy him and defy his commands, and they're going to eat. After they get past Scylla and the whirlpool, they will eventually end up on an island, and Zeus's law commands that not to eat the sacred cattle. Are you serious? Did we just get? Benjamin says the stream got suspended, perhaps for using of the. Perhaps due to the presentation of the YouTube video. Oh, okay. Well, let's not do that then. If we got copyright struck because of that, what can I do? Can I restart the stream somehow? Shoot. It says it's live. Let's see what happens if I... Hello? It should still be working. Can you guys just double check on your end if we're still going on YouTube? Because I just went to YouTube and it seems to be working. If somebody can get me somebody in the chat can confirm that from your end, then we'll just keep going. Yeah, YouTube is terrible for that. So I can't be doing this video stuff. I thought I could use the video to help facilitate the discussion, but obviously that's not working. So yes, you're back now. Okay, good. Okay, so let's just continue. So where were we? Oh yeah, so we get off the island of the witch, we go into hell, we get the prophecy, and then we get some more information, but I'll skip that until later. Now this might be a little bit out of order. Actually, I can use it on the back end. I don't have to play it, so I'll just use it for my reference. We get to okay, so we get through. We have to face Scylla, which is a Hydra. That's the monster that Sir Christopher Lee's character was warning Odysseus about. And then there's the whirlpool, and so they have to navigate that. Then we go back to Ithaca for a while, and we deal with more of that story. But then we end up on the island of Calypso, and the island of Calypso, she's an enchantress, and time works differently there, and because of the for every day that Odysseus spends on the island, 5 years passes. So I think he's on the island a grand total of 3 days, and so 10 or 15 years pass. So, and him and his men are seduced by Calypso and her nymphs. But then eventually he will get off the island with the help of Athena. Again, I can't show you any of this. Then they have to pass the island of the Sirens. And again, so more female temptation. Odysseus orders his men to tie him to the mast of the ship and orders them to put wax in their ears so they cannot hear the lure of the sirens call, but he listens because he wants to be the only man to have ever heard their call and survived. So, but he's wise enough, but it's actually Athena who tells him to put wax in his men's ears, so that, because, so again, he goes through and he passes another one of her tests. And this continues. He faces, he gets through the Sirens, and then they go to the island where his men are starving. He goes off to do whatever. His men who are starving, they eat one of the sacred cows that Odysseus told them not to, because it's Zeus's or it's Apollo's sacred cows, but they do anyway. And he said, don't you understand that you're going to die now? And he said, and they tell him, well, Odysseus, we were going to die of hunger anyway, so we figured we might as well die happy and fulfilled instead of dying from hunger. But this scene of the men eating the sacred cow, when Odysseus told them not to because of Zeus's law, parallels the scene from Exodus when the Israelites, when Moses goes up the mountain to receive God's law, the Israelites get impatient and they decide to make a golden calf, and they start worshiping the golden calf. And when Moses comes back down the mountain, he unleashes God's fury upon the Israelites who have decided to worship this pagan symbol, this sacred cow. This is a parallel to this part of Homer's Odyssey. I'm not arguing which one came first. That's irrelevant. because they both were divinely inspired, but it is the same symbol of men defying, and it's the same thing. It's a cow, and the cow is a sacred symbol. I mean, it's sacred to the Hindus. And what is a cow? What do we do with cows mostly? Why are cows sacred? Because cows provide milk. Of all the other animals that we have domesticated, cow milk is by far the most abundant, and beef is by far the most nutritious meat in terms of energy and in terms of being able to feed an entire village, right, for a week by slaughtering one cow. So the cow has always been sacred. And also we have to remember that at this time we're living in the age of Aries. And what is the symbol of Aries? It's the ram. Actually, no, so that's not a cow, is it? So the bull. What? It's the bull. Aries is the bull, isn't it? No, Aries is the ram. So which? So the ram is it's Taurus, right? It's Taurus. So my contention would be that the original story of Homer, before it was ever set down, would have been it would have originated in the age of Taurus, or something related to Taurus, the fact that there's a cow there. But Aries is the ram, and Taurus is the bull. So the bull relates to the cow. So in any case, Homer's men, they eat the sacred cow. Zeus's law comes down on them. They die. So now Odysseus is alone, and he has to go back out on the ocean by himself in what basically amounts to a raft at this point. And Poseidon just hammers him with storms until he finally submits. And he finally humbles himself and accepts and says these immortal words, "Man is nothing without the gods." And upon doing so, Poseidon releases him of his anger, of his rage, and washes him up on the shores of Ithaca. So Odysseus is home now. After 20 years, he is at home. But he's ragged, he's disheveled, he's beaten down, he's battered, he's completely humbled and humiliated by the gods. And Athena comes to him and she says, at last you are home, and you've become the man that you need to be, with the wisdom that you need to have in order to rule and to reunite with Penelope. But first, you must defeat the suitors who are occupying your palace. And she says, so you cannot return the way you are as Odysseus, because the suitors will kill you, because they are all vying for your throne. But don't worry, she says, I will give you a disguise, and no one will be able to recognize you. And so she changes his face, and he's so disheveled and humiliated and humbled. So now he can take on the persona of a beggar, of an old beggar, impoverished, in other words, nothing to his name and no name. And in this guise, he returns to the palace and he gives news. He meets with Penelope, who does not recognize him in his disguise. And long story short, there is an encounter with the suitors. And Penelope, after meeting with the old man, uh, tells her that Odysseus is lost. He might, but he'll be here when she needs him most. But he lost his way, and he reminds her that she made a promise to him that if, when their son Telchonitis came of age, and he had not yet returned, that she was to remarry. So she sets up a challenge for the suitors. And what they do is they hammer in axe heads. But the way it should be is they take the handles out of axe heads and hammer them down such that all of the holes in the axe heads where the handles were are lined up in a straight line. And she says, any man who can shoot an arrow, who can string my husband's bow and shoot an arrow through all of these axe heads, that man will be my husband. And of course, nobody can string Odysseus's bow. It is a conceit. It is a part of the story that this bow was so strong and so powerful, only Odysseus knew the trick of how to string it. It was a compound bow, a reflex bow. So all of the suitors are trying to do this, and they lose patience, and they say, this is impossible. Nobody can do this. And then the hooded old beggar from the back says, well, I haven't tried yet. I would like a try. And so sure enough, he is able to string the bow, and he is able to shoot the arrow through the axe heads. And at that moment, he is transformed, and he's revealed to everybody that he is Odysseus. And Penelope realizes that he was Odysseus the whole time, and that he is alive and he's returned. And in this moment, Odysseus dispatches the suitors, basically cleanses his palace of the occupants, those who were infesting and infecting and exploiting the hospitality of his house. And he reunites with Penelope, and et cetera, happily ever after. Now, the significance of this last part of the Odyssey, the return home, there's a number of different levels and layers to this. The first one is the act of Odysseus dispatching the suitors. First of all, him stringing the bow, and the way he plucks the bow. Odysseus. I should mention one other thing. Argo. I should mention Argo, the dog. Odysseus's dog. Odysseus's dog has been waiting for him 20 years to return. So he's very, 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 very old. And the thing is that Argo, and so when Odysseus returns, Argo recognizes him. And he wags his tail a couple of times. He recognizes his master, and his master has returned, and he can finally die. Argo, the dog, represents the physical body, the animal self, the animal aspect of Odysseus's former self, that which was loyal to the old Odysseus, the former Odysseus, the Odysseus who left 20 years ago, was now returned. But Argo, where we get the name Argo for the dog, comes from Jason and the Argonauts. The Argonauts, the mythical voyage of Jason and the Argonauts. The Argonauts were that force that traveled on the sea. So the Argonauts are a navy. They are a vessel. So Argo, after the Argonauts, the dog is a companion, is a servant, is a familiar. It's an animal familiar who serves his master. It is an animal vessel. That is why he's called Argo. but that vessel dies when the father returns, right? This whole voyage of Odysseus, his descent into hell, and the death of all of his men, of all of his egos, and his humiliation, and being turned into a beggar, right? As Jesus was a carpenter's son, right? That dies on the cross so that the Christ can rise from the dead. Argo dies so that the father of the house can return. That father is our innermost being, but Christified, cleansed of all of his egos, of all of his vices, of his pride, of his hubris. He is humble. And he comes to restore Zeus's law to his house and fulfill the will of Poseidon and the will of Athena, the will of the gods. He is a servant of the gods because at last he comes to that revelation that man is nothing without the gods. And so he dispatches all the suitors and he's reunited with Penelope and he restores the law of Zeus, and his son, Telechinetus, can ascend to the throne. So the son of God, right? The son of man, the son of Odysseus and Penelope. The Odyssey then is a story of the path of self-realization, the path of Christification, the path of transmutation, of sexual alchemy. It is a profoundly esoteric, it is a great mythology and profound expression of the secret knowledge of the mystery schools, which would eventually be taught in the mystery schools of later Greece, which would come later. Plato had a mystery, Pythagoras had a mystery school. There's the mystery schools of the Temple of Apollo at anyway, it'll come to me. So I'm just so bad with names. That's why I'm not good as if I don't have the names in front of me, like as a reference material, I cannot remember names for the life of me. Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, the mystery school at Delphi in the Temple of Apollo. This is why this story has endured for thousands of years. Because it's not about a war and a king and his wife and the suitors and a cyclops and the sirens and the Hydra and all of this stuff. It's just these are all just the superficial symbols and allegories to deliver this deeper, more significant truth that is relevant to all of our lives. It is the path, the journey, the odyssey of a monad to ascend by first descending and going through all of these tests and trials and ordeals set against us by our own Divine Mother, in order that we may rise and fulfill our potential to self-actualize, to become a giant among men, and to recognize that a man cannot do that by himself, that man is nothing without the gods. Because we must rise to the challenge to become God-like, to become a giant among men, to embody, to restore the law of Zeus, to become a He Zeus, Jesus, an anointed one, anointed by the gods, anointed by Zeus and Athena, our Father who art in heaven, and our individual divine mother, divine masculine and divine feminine. That we become a child of Zeus and Athena. And the child of the Father is the Son, is the Christ, a Christified one. That's what Homer's Odyssey is about. And that the entire process is overseen by Athena. And that Poseidon works for her because he is the god of the waters. Because Athena is the goddess. It's the fires and waters of sexuality. That's why the entire voyage takes place on the ocean. And Poseidon is the one who is constantly testing Odysseus on the ocean. And then while he's on land, he's being tested by who? Personifications of the Divine Mother. By Circe, by Calypso, by the sirens. They're all feminine. All to do what? To return home to his Penelope, his wife, the feminine aspect of his being, so that they can reunite. And him cleansing his palace of the suitors is a direct parallel to Jesus ejecting the moneylenders and the livestock traders from the temple. And he does that so the beggar can be transformed into the Father, and that his Son can take the throne. So Jesus says to the Pharisees, I will tear down this temple in 3 days, build a new one. And he ejects the moneylenders and livestock traders from the temple so that the poor son of a carpenter can be crucified on the cross, and that the Christ can arise and bring the law of Zeus, the law of the Father, and that the Christ can rule as Christ the King. The Son of God can rule as Christ the King for 1,000 years. But he brings with him the new covenant. And by the way, the new covenant that he brings with him, this He Zeus, right, happens to be the same law of Zeus that was in Homer, which is do unto others as you would have done unto you. This is why Homer has endured for thousands of years. Not the adventure. It's what's beneath. It's the spiritual, psycho-spiritual, esoteric, metaphysical nutrition, the foundation and the deep core of that story, that narrative, and the symbols and allegories that veil it. Because even though our intellect might not get it when we watch it, but our unconscious mind does receive, does see the deeper meanings of the symbols and allegories. And what was it that Carl Jung said? It's our job is to make the unconscious conscious. We must become conscious of these things so that it's not just an unconscious function inside of us, so we don't know why we love something so much, why it endures for generation after generation. because our mind will say, well, of course, because it's important because of this, and it's important because of that, and it's, you know, and it's the collapse of the Bronze Age and all this. Like, I'm not even going to get into all of that kind of stuff. All of the other, see, one of the things that Christopher Nolan's film does is it strips away so much of the mythology from it. He ends up making his interpretation of Homer. I heard one reviewer describe it as essentially turning Homer's Odyssey into a Oliver Stone movie about a traumatized Vietnam vet. There's two things that Christopher Nolan does. He makes Odysseus suffer from guilt and shame for what he did at Troy, for sacking Troy. And Christopher Nolan in an interview said that I couldn't do the Odyssey until after I did Oppenheimer. He said I had to do Oppenheimer first. And his reasoning was that Oppenheimer is the modern figure who essentially changed the world by inventing the atomic bomb and giving the world the atomic bomb. And so Oppenheimer's guilt and shame around that is, I've become death, the destroyer of worlds. That yes, the atomic bomb ended the Second World War, the war with Japan, but in the process, changed the world forever, created the Cold War and made the world a much, much more dangerous place. And Nolan interprets the Odyssey and the sacking of Troy and the building of the Trojan horse to trick the Trojans. He equates that to the dropping of the atomic bomb. And in his interpretation of Homer, he has Homer explicitly saying that, because there's historians talk about the alleged collapse of the Bronze Age due to the arrival of the so-called sea peoples, and that Christopher Nolan has Odysseus in the movie actually saying that because of what he did at Troy, because he violated Zeus's law at Troy and everybody thought it was a great victory, now people from all over are coming and they're violating Zeus's law left, right, and center. These sea peoples, they have no principles, they have no ethics, they don't follow Zeus's law because they heard about what I did at Troy. So he's equating Odysseus to Oppenheimer, and he's equating that the Trojan horse represents the beginning of the collapse of the Bronze Age to Oppenheimer, the dropping of the atomic bomb, as the beginning of the collapse of our civilization because it was the birth of the atomic age. So it's a completely secular, intellectual, historical, political interpretation. And it is, ironically, an expression of Christopher Nolan's hubris. And that he believes that he removes Odysseus's hubris, Odysseus's pride, from his interpretation. But little does he know, shame is the flip side of pride. So ironically, Nolan's version does have Odysseus's tragic flaw. It's still hubris, but it's not the front side of pride, it's the flip side of pride. Not hubris and narcissism, but shame. Not too much self-love, but self-hatred. So despite his best efforts to sabotage Homer and to use it for his own secular political agenda, ironically, in the end, the divine truth embedded in Homer's Odyssey endures. As much as Nolan tried to strip it out and make it secular and down to earth, it still endures, which is why so many people still find it compelling. They don't know why they find it compelling, but they find it compelling. Because shame and guilt are the flip side of pride. And Nolan's Odysseus is filled with that particular kind of hubris. So as much as we like to say that he changed Odysseus's character, yeah, he kind of did. But shame and guilt are still pride. It's still self-absorption. It's still self-righteousness, and it's not too much self-love, it's self-loathing. So really, the truth and the essence of Homer endures despite Nolan's best efforts to make the story his own and make it his own interpretation. So it is an interpretation, not an adaptation. But you see, Homer and the Odyssey will endure for 1,000 years to come still, because that essence, that Odysseus has a tragic flaw, that endures. As does the Divine Mother, as does, the Trojan War, the Trojan Horse, and Circe's, and, so there's enough of a connection, and we can go back to the original. But what's most important is that we become conscious of the deeper significance and symbol and meaning of the deeper meaning of the symbols and allegories of this story, because that's what gives a story legs. That's the difference between just, Hollywood slop versus Shakespeare, Greek tragedies, or any other stories, narrative, fairy tales, even nursery rhymes that endure generation after generation after generation. Classical music from, a lot of the music from the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Much of what's written today will not endure because it was not inspired. It's not in spirit. So what endures? Well, I wanted to now, because of this YouTube thing cutting off, I don't know if I'm going to be able to I posted a TED Talk on my Facebook channel, which you may or may not have had a chance to watch. And I described, I sort of elaborated on what that TED Talk was trying to get at. You know what? It'd be easier if I pulled it up on Facebook. Where are we here? Be more. Let's see if I can pull it up. Yeah, okay.
This is Roger Penrose.
I'm gonna try to. Oops. I'm going to try to share this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause it now and then, so it's now we'll do it like that. Okay, I will pause it every now and then, so hopefully we won't get dinged on it. So this is a TED Talk by Terry Moore, and he's talking about Roger Penrose. I'm going to keep the subtitles on, but I guess I'll go. You know what? So what he's talking about here. Okay.
Mathematics, and that part of mathematics known as tiling. You know, tiling, the process of putting tiles together so that they form a particular pattern.
Okay, so this was Roger Penrose, the mathematician, who made this contribution.
The thing that was remarkable about the pattern that Roger Penrose developed is that by using only two shapes, he constructed a pattern that could be expanded infinitely in any direction.
Okay, you guys got that? Can you guys see that okay? It's coming in a little bright on my screen, but hopefully you guys can see that.
Without ever repeating. Much like the number pi has a decimal that isn't random, but it will go on forever without repeating. In mathematics, this is a property known as aperiodicity. And the notion of an aperiodic tile set using only two tiles was such a sensation, it was given the name Penrose tiling.
Okay, so that's the little introduction here. So we're talking about Penrose tiling. Now, essentially what this is as he described it, you take two tiles, two different kinds of tiles, and you can put those two different kinds of tiles together in such a way that you can make an infinite number of patterns, and you can expand those patterns out infinitely. And he starts showing some examples here.
Madrasa. And after some analysis, concluded that this was in fact Penrose tiling 500 years before Penrose. That information took the scientific world by storm and prompted headlines everywhere, including Discover magazine, which proclaimed this the 59th most important scientific discovery of the year 2007.
Okay. Let's see if we can get to... Yeah, they start talking... Okay, so let's go...
The worldview of the culture that made this. And this is what we learn. This pattern is life. And as you can see, life's complicated. It's complicated. But not only is life complicated, life is also aperiodic in the sense that every event, every happening, every decision will make the future unfold differently, often in ways that are impossible to predict.
I'm trying to skip over the... Okay, so let's the next part's important too.
Possible to predict, there remains an underlying unity that holds everything together and gives rise to everything. Let's see how that works in a design much like the one Peter Liu found in Uzbekistan.
Okay, so this has relevance to the Odyssey because of the unfolding of a pattern like the periodicity or like pi. There's an unpredictability to life, and there's an unpredictability to the path, and it's all dependent upon the choices that we make. But there's only two tiles we can choose from in any given point in time. Shakespeare called those tiles to be or not to be. We can also think of those tiles from a structural design framework or from a foundational framework. We can think of those tiles as masculine and feminine, right? Or duality itself, right? The two halves of the Tao. But then in their combination, the underlying unity becomes apparent. Now, okay, we'll get into some of the...
This is that design. Now, it turns out this is actually based on this set of Penrose tiles, which are reducible to these shapes. And in order to draw these shapes, the medieval craftsmen who did this would have done them by using these construction lines. And I add here that the construction lines don't appear in the final work. But if we add them back, we have this. And now if we weave them together, we will have this. And now if we hide the tiles and just look at the construction lines, we see this. Clearly, there's an underlying structure and unity to things that seem to be complex and aperiodic.
Okay, so this is the key. This through line, this thread.
Notion of a hidden underlying unity was common throughout the ancient world. And one sees it in Egypt, in Greece, in Australia, in Mesoamerica, in North America, in Europe, and in the Middle East. Now, in the modern West, we might call this underlying unity God, but throughout the ages, other terms have been used to describe the same thing. This is what Plato called first cause. In the medieval period, philosopher Spinoza called this the singular substance. In the 20th century, a number of terms were coined to describe this, one of my favorites being from philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who called this the undifferentiated aesthetic continuum. Doesn't that have a 20th century sound to it?
Okay, so here's the if you're starting to gather what he's trying to say here, is that this Penrose tiling has this underlying what he equates to first cause. But the first cause are the two tiles. This is a mistake that the intellect makes all the time, the rational mind makes. In science, it's called the correlation causality fallacy. Just because you can identify a pattern and then a correlation between two things, that's what this is. That's all this is. It's identifying that there is a continuum that's connecting all of these shapes, right? That the shapes can be reducible, right, to the two Penrose tiles. And that when it's actually constructing, you take the tiles away, you discover that there's this continuum. And then clearly there's a correlation between the continuum and the tiles, the tile pattern that we can observe, right? And so we find the continuum in the correlation between the two. And the mind says, the rational mind says, oh, what's going on here? Why you? There we go. So there's a relationship, a correlation, And the conclusion that the rational mind makes is that, this continuum must be the cause of that tiling, that tile set. But this is not true. What we are looking at here is first purpose. This continuum emerges from the placing, from the formation of these shapes and the placing of these shapes into these tiles, into these patterns. That continuum emerges. Now, it's true because of the relational nature of the Penrose tiles. There is causality at play here. But what's more important to realize is that to be able to get to a point where we identify and can see this underlying unity to what appears to be randomness or just arbitrary patterns on the surface, say this is the reason, the cause and the effect, and the union of the cause and the effect is the meaning, the purpose behind the cause and the effect. In other words, this underlying unity is the emergent meaning of the exercise of creating the tiling in the first place. That's why this tiling and mosaics and such were so popular in the ancient world and in places like in Persia and in Turkey and in Europe and in the ancient world, in other words. Now, in other words, this is what makes Homer endure. Because of this being present, any tiling, any tile set that doesn't use the Penrose tile set and isn't made according to sacred geometry,
there's an underlying structure
that doesn't produce this underlying structure, this underlying unity, will not endure. So we see sacred patterns like this is the Aztec calendar, and look at this, stained glass window from a cathedral, and these stained glass motifs are all throughout the ancient cathedrals. Now, when we comprehend that we talk about, and he said at the beginning, the speaker said that we can look at this pattern, this underlying pattern, and we in the West, he said, we might call it God. Okay. Well, what is God? What is God? You're going to say that God is this? God is the underlying unity, the underlying structure behind life, behind all of reality. Because remember, all reality is duality, positive and negative, masculine, feminine, to be or not to be, right? All of binary duality is just the two tiles being arranged in an infinite number of possible combinations that produce this underlying unity. But the point, but here's the key. Produces the underlying unity. which can then be discovered, which can then be known. God is the absolute abstract nothingness. No thing and no self. That is the absolute essence and spirit of selflessness. Selflessness cannot be known in and of itself. If you pardon the ironic, paradoxical use of the term, right? Selflessness, zero, is unknowable to itself. Nothing, selflessness, cannot know itself because there is no self to know. But more importantly, the nature of selflessness demands, requires an other that to whom I can give from myself. Selflessness, pure, unadulterated selflessness, cannot express its nature as an absolute abstract phenomenon. It cannot be known even unto itself. Selflessness cannot know itself. It cannot actualize. It cannot be realized as nothing, as the absolute, as zero. Because for selflessness to know its own nature, that is to be selfless, it must have a self that it can sacrifice, and there must be an other who can receive that sacrifice. What does that mean? That means you need a minimum of 2 tiles, one capable of giving, the other capable of receiving. The receptive tile we call the giving tile, the expressive tile we call masculine, the receptive tile we call feminine. The masculine tile is first, the father. The feminine receptive tile is second, the mother. Their union creates the third, the child. The union of masculine and feminine, the reconciliation, and the creation of that, the child, is the object of selflessness from both father and mother. It's the next iteration of the process that can then continue and proliferate, like pi, like the Penrose tiles. And in other words, what happens is, as you place these tiles in an infinite number of patterns and expressions, the first cause of those 2 tiles emerges as a continuum, as a unity. And selflessness can at last see itself and know itself through what? Through our works, through the unfolding of the universe, through how these 2 tiles fit together in an infinite number of patterns. But these are nothing without this. This is the purpose for why right, these exist. But on the surface, they just look like random shapes. You must penetrate into them to discover their true nature. And then it's through the cosmic dance and the cosmic interrelationship between them that their true nature unfolds and expresses. And if you allow the tiles to fade away, if you step out of your tileness and into the oneness of the continuum, into selflessness, now you become one with the emergent God knowing itself, the absolute knowing itself through the creation of the universe. This is what I was explained in the context, in the comment on the video that I posted on Facebook. This is why man is nothing without the gods. Man is nothing without his divine nature, without the gods. But why God needs man, and why God creates the universe, why the absolute creates the universe, to know itself, so that selflessness can become self-actualized, can be realized. And because it first forms itself into these tiles, right? And then those tiles are placed into some form of order or chaos, depending, right? But into something. In that process, people start to become conscious of this, right? They start to become conscious of themselves, their nature, their true nature, which is selflessness. That's why to know yourself, you shall know the universe and the gods. And that's why the Buddhists say the highest self is no self. The highest self is selflessness. But when this TED Talk crossed my path, I just thought it was a very, very succinct and beautiful way to visualize and express and explain how the first cause is the very purpose and meaning of life, of reality, of existence, and God itself. It's not that this creates the universe. No, the universe was created in order to arrive at this, whatever this is. Because whatever it is, it's going to be an expression of selflessness. Because that is the true nature of the Penrose tiles. That is their underlying nature. The problem is that secularization and the intellect, materialism and mechanicity, wants to believe that these shapes appeared just because randomly, or because of evolution, or whatever rationalization, whatever clever reason they convince themselves of, and they're ignorant of this, and especially ignorant of that, and the relationship between the two, and why the first exists, and why they can't exist without each other. Because selflessness, it can exist as a phenomenon, but it cannot be known. It cannot be actualized. It cannot be realized. Right? So,
Apes.
Anyway, wanted to share that in the context of Homer's Odyssey. Because there we have masculine and feminine, and we have the relationship between the two, and how the two fit together across space and time, no less. And why man is nothing without the gods, and why it is that the gods require man. It is a relationship, and why it is we have this ancient idea of gods mating with, right, joining with, fusing with mortals, and giving rise to the giants, to the Nephilim, whose eye is single, who's a cyclops. It's a symbol. It's an allegory for our mortal self uniting with our higher self, our innermost, our Father in heaven, and our divine mother. And knowing, and you shall love your God with all your heart and all your soul at the exclusion of all others. You shall take no other gods before me. What does that mean? That's what it means to be faithful, isn't it? To be faithful to your spouse is to know your spouse intimately at the exclusion of all others, right? To be monogamous. To know your spouse in the biblical sense, to unite with them. Union. Well, union with divinity is relegare in Latin, and in Sanskrit is yug, the root word of yoga. And in Latin, relegare is the root word of religion. To achieve union, oneness, to know your immortal beloved, your innermost immortal beloved, to know them in the biblical sense, to achieve union with them. That's why Odysseus has to make love to Circe to transform his animal egos back into men, back into humans. Because he has to work with the divine feminine force in the ninth sphere. He has to perform white magic, in other words. So this idea of humans making love to the gods, that's a symbol, that's an allegory. That doesn't mean that's so. Yes, there is precedent from a historical perspective, but from a mythological perspective, the importance there is to understand what our potential is. The Nephilim are not monsters. The giants are not monsters. To be a giant among men, to be a titan, to be a child of the gods, is what it means to be a master, a giant among men, a prophet, an avatar, a saint, right? These are giants among men. Why? Because they have transcended their animal self. They've sacrificed their inner goat. They've transmuted the milk into cheese. And they have allowed their inner giant to feast on their egos, so that its I can become one, and that it can be a giant among men and a child of the gods. But in order to do that, we cannot be blinded by hubris. We cannot be blinded by our pride, like Odysseus was. Benjamin says, thank you for explaining the parallels and symbolism between the works of Homer and other sacred and timeless literature. I have a question, though. Living in a Western society where earning a living is essential, how can one genuinely cultivate a selfless attitude when so much of our time, energy, and attention is devoted to meeting material needs and pursuing financial security? It often seems that the pursuit of material gain has become one of the dominant forces shaping human consciousness. How can we remain inwardly detached from material pursuits while still fulfilling our responsibilities in everyday life? That's a good question. And he continues here. He says, the pursuit of material success reminds me of the symbolism of the golden calf you mentioned, where material wealth becomes the focus of one's devotion. Well, this is where Homer's Odyssey can be very helpful, because And I encourage all of you, despite the fact that I can't play it because we'll get shut down again. But I encourage all of you, I can pull up, I recommend the 4K restoration on YouTube of the 1997. Okay, let me put this on screen. Okay, so let me, so that's me live at the top, right? That's this live stream. But if I scroll down here, you see these two thumbnails, and you'll see this title, the Odyssey 1997 Part 2 4K remaster, and then the Odyssey 1997 Part 1 remaster. Let me see. You know what? I can do this. Share, copy. Okay. All you need is Part 1, because once you have Part 1, you can find the link to Part 2. In other words, you'll have exactly what you need to find Part 2. So that's the link to Part 1. And again, it's the title is, I'm just going to put the title on screen for you as well, so you know exactly what to put into your YouTube search. Okay, so it's Part 1 and Part 2. It's the exact same title, but search for the Odyssey 1997 4K remaster, and you will find it. So the links and the titles are in the chat. Now, I put these in there because I encourage you to watch this and pay attention to all the times. Pay attention to Odysseus's pride, his hubris. No, I don't need the gods. I don't need the favor. I don't need gods. I don't need Poseidon's favor. I don't need your help. I don't need that. I can do this myself. My cunning, my cleverness, my capabilities, my intelligence. I will do this. I am going to save my men. I am going to get home. I am going to, right? It's I need to do this. I need to be responsible, in other words, right? And all of the suffering that he goes through, all of the tests and trials and ordeals he goes through, is so he can turn into a beggar and at last be washed up on the shore, because on that raft on the ocean, he finally gives in and he says, man is nothing without the gods. So when you ask Benjamin, how can we cultivate selflessness and humility, and how can we surrender our fate to our Father who art in heaven, and how can we art here below on earth as our Father who art in heaven, right? This is the as above, so below, the Hermetic principle of correspondence. We are a vessel. We are a vehicle. We are Argo. We are supposed to be the faithful servant. Well, who takes care of a servant? Does the servant take care of themselves? Is a servant responsible for taking care of themselves? And think of servants in the ancient sense. They were slaves. But who takes care of the servant? Who provides for the servant? Does a servant go and serve their Lord and Master, and then at the end of the day have to go home and have to go and work a second job? This is essentially what you're asking me. How can I serve my innermost Lord and Master when the world is requiring me to make a living for myself? And my answer to you is, why are you not making a living serving your innermost Lord and Master. Or perhaps you are already doing so, but you've taken credit for it yourself. Who got you the job that you're in? How did that job that you're in, how did that come to you? And are you able to maintain your integrity? Are you able to be true to yourself? Or does the workplace that you're in, the job that you're in, the career that you're in, require you to lie, go along with questionable business practices, questionable ethics? Or does your career allow you to instill in your work and your workplace the same values, the Christian values, or the Gnostic values, or whatever values, whatever name you want to give them? Does your job permit you to be a good person on the job? Well, then your work, your day-to-day work, should be a tribute to your innermost Father and your Divine Mother. If your innermost Father and your Divine Mother are the ones who got you that job, if it was a blessing, if it was a miracle, if it was whatever that you landed in that job that you're in right now, that allows you to provide for your family, then you should be grateful for it. But if you're in a job where you have to that you're not true to yourself, then it might be worthwhile asking yourself, is this what I'm meant to be doing? Is there something else I should be doing? And if there's something else I should be doing, how do I know what that is? The only answer is, man is nothing without the gods. Your Divine Mother will show you. Your innermost being, your Father in heaven, will tell you what thou art to be on earth as your Father who art in heaven. Benjamin says, thank you for your thoughtful answer, sir. It brought me one of those genuine aha moments and gave me a new perspective. Well, I'm happy to hear that. I'm glad to be of service. Remember, I'm here serving all of you. That's all I'm doing. And I'm doing my best to serve humanity. That's my job. And I put my faith and trust in my Father in heaven to look after me, because I'm serving my Father in heaven. I'm serving my Divine Mother. I'm serving God. And as a servant of God, I trust that my Lord and Master is going to look after me. I don't live in the lap of luxury, but I don't need actually, frankly, I do kind of live in the lap of luxury. I don't want to boast or anything, but I think I've told you before, the apartment I'm living in now, if I compare it to what I was living in Japan, this is palatial by comparison. So I have absolutely no complaints whatsoever. There's no deficiencies. There's nothing more than I need than this 1-bedroom apartment. And I've got everything I need. I got grocery stores and everything around me within walking distance. I've got the bus stop. One bus stop is a 2-minute walk away. The other bus stop is a 5-minute walk away. I'm want for nothing. I've been provided for. Everything. I'm not married and I have no children, mind you, but I'm confident. I know in my heart that if that had been part of the plan and part of my purpose and part of my mission was supposed to include having a family, I know that I still could have served my innermost Lord and Master, and my Divine Mother would have provided for them, and my wife would have participated, and she would have helped pull the weight. So that wouldn't all have been just on my shoulders alone. Because believe me, for a very, very, very long time, I lived with an Attlas complex, because at a very young age, I knew that I was here to serve. But unfortunately, the way people depict Attlas and everything else, and I really did feel the weight of that. And I felt the weight, and again, the guilt and the shame of, oh my God, I have to do this. I have to do this. In other words, I was Odysseus. And if you've read my book, if you've read part 1 of my book, you know that I had to go on my own Odyssey, and that Poseidon and the other gods were beating me down, just like Odysseus was beat down into submission, until at last I too knelt down, threw my arms up in the air, and said, I'm not qualified. That's how the words came to me. But as part of that prayer, I said, like, I can't do this by myself. I can't do this alone. In fact, I can't do this at all. You show me the way, you tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And if you give me my life back, my life is yours. This was my prayer to my innermost Lord and Master. And I have lived true to my word as best as I could ever since. And it breaks my heart. It's so sad that with $250 million budget, Christopher Nolan, his film tried to secularize, modernize, and make dreary and bland and dull and all the other things, all the other mistakes that he made. But thankfully, gratefully, truth endures. And even in Nolan's Odyssey, Odysseus's tragic flaw is hubris. Not the hubris of pride, but the hubris of shame, which is the other side of the coin. So for that reason, I go and see the movie if you want. Go and see it in IMAX. They say it's spectacular in IMAX, which is another, I don't want to get into a technical conversation about filmmaking. It's another mistake that he made, because there's no reason to film it in IMAX. But in any case, go see it if you wish, just to know what all the hubbub is about. But I think you'd just be just as well off to watch the 1997 version for free on YouTube. And again, the links are in the chat. And again, that's the title that you want to search on YouTube: The Odyssey 1997 4K remaster. That'll bring it up. And or read the poem. It'll take you a while to get through it. Does anybody have any questions or comments? It's only a handful of us left. I mean, it's a long live stream today. I'm not sure where Wolfgang is today. Maybe it's because he didn't see the movie or whatever. He didn't probably felt he didn't have anything to contribute. Or maybe, hopefully he's well. I haven't spoken to him, so hopefully it's not some other issue, but it's possible that he's gone and he's working on a garden today or something. But if there are no other questions or comments, I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here today. And perhaps this presentation and this Odyssey of ours into Homer's Odyssey will help you acclimatize you and align your own consciousness and make you a little bit more symbolically literate. You see, for me, I did not know any of this about Homer in my younger days, I had to live it. I had to become Odysseus. I had to go on my own Odyssey and experience all of this. Right? I had to date Circes myself. I had to be tempted by the sirens, and I was. Right? I had to watch my men being eaten by the Hydra and falling into the whirlpool, which they did. And I was also blinded by pride. So, you know, the shame, the Attlas complex that I had, that I have to do it, that I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. That's not what Attlas means anymore. That's not what Attlas means. Not for me anymore. And because I've lived through it, when I watch a real adaptation of Homer, like the 1997 version that I shared with you, I can watch it and the catharsis that I can experience through Odysseus and the knowledge that I have of what I'm watching on screen, it's a reflection of what my monad, what my divine being, the soul has gone through, what my human soul, the Odyssey of my human soul is being reflected in symbol and allegory on the screen. Far less so in Nolan's Odyssey. That's what breaks my heart. But at first I was a little bit, I was like, why is it doing so well? And at last it clicked on me. Well, of course, because even though everybody's talking, it's Nolan's Odysseus is traumatized. He's traumatized, right? No, it's guilt and it's shame, which is pride. So despite Nolan's best efforts, Odysseus's tragic flaw persists. It's pride, it's hubris, it's still there. And that's why people can still connect with it and can still relate to it. And that there's enough in the Cyclops sequence and everything else enough is preserved there that there's enough truth there. See, a story cannot endure for thousands of years on a weak, superficial veneer. There's enough meat on the bone that even somebody stripping the meat off of it, like a shawarma shop, well, you got to strip quite a lot. You got to strip quite a lot away before you get down to an empty bone. That's the point. Benjamin says, thanks again, sir, for sharing your insights on these topics. I've truly benefited from your discussions. Have a blessed week ahead. I'll be watching the 1997 version. Well, yeah, enjoy it and take your time with it. And to all of you, I want to wish you a very pleasant upcoming week. Be well. And I hope that your Odyssey continues to unfold as it should, as I'm sure it will. And that remember the video from today about the Penrose tiles and the underlying unity. And that when you go through life, remember that what's on the surface is there for a reason, but the truth and meaning of it and purpose of it, the first cause, the first purpose is between the lines. It's between the shapes. It's hidden. That's the metaphysical. That's the esoteric. That's why you come to this live stream on Sundays. And that's what you're seeking to know inside of yourself, right? Your own individuated spirit and essence of the absolute spirit of selflessness within you, expressing itself and longing to be self-actualized, self-realized through you. All right. So be well, all the best. And until next week, as always, I wish you all inferential peace. Take care, everyone.